I emptied 27 years of savings into lawyers and investigators to keep my son out of prison. The verdict still came down guilty, and my wife walked out that night as if grief were a bill I refused to pay. Broke, ashamed, and past 50, I sat behind thick glass while my boy pressed a napkin of numbers to the window. I figured it was hope pretending to be math, until the locker they led me to began ticking down everything I thought I knew. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. The napkin had 3 things: 447, a 6-digit code written twice, and an arrow that looked more like a tremor than a symbol. The guard had already told me time was up when Ethan's eyes held mine and he mouthed, slow and deliberate, "Check Union Station." The words stuck to the fogged glass like a dare. I tucked the napkin under my wallet, nodded once so he could see resolve on my face, and walked out past the vending machines I couldn't afford anymore. I'm Jacob Halverson, 52, maintenance supervisor out of Glendale, California. I take pride in things that stay fixed: elevators that open level, motors that hum at the right frequency, doors that latch clean. None of that mattered the night, September 15, 2025, when Judge Valerie Ortega read the word guilty and my son's shoulders folded like wet cardboard. The charge said armed robbery and aggravated battery at a corner pharmacy in Echo Park on March 4th. The injury was real. The clerk got 12 stitches and a concussion. What wasn't real was my son doing it. The prosecutor put a hoodie on a screen. They put a grainy frame beside it and called it a face. They called my son's old Civic a flight car because a plate reader caught it 4 blocks away at 9:18 p.m., even though his time card from the Glendale Public Library stamped him on shift at 9:06 and 9:30. Evidence is a drum. Once a juror hears it enough, it becomes the only rhythm in the room. I'd already paid $60,000 in retainer to a defense attorney named Michael Donahue, a man with cufflinks sturdy enough to look like promises. Another $22,000 went to a private investigator who logged 32 interviews and 400 miles. I pulled $98,000 out of a second mortgage, then slowed the bleeding by selling the F-150 I rebuilt with my boy when he was 17 for $8,500 cash. A price that cut. My wife, Marissa, stood up when the verdict landed, didn't look at me, and told our aisle, loud enough to make a point, he just wasted our future on a criminal. The bailiff shifted, the reporter's pen ticked, and something older than my temper broke in me but stayed quiet. She left her ring on the nightstand that evening like a polite protest, packed 2 suitcases, and by morning she was gone. I held that napkin in the prison lot, the lines of it soft with grease from the cafeteria grilled cheese Ethan loves too much to complain about. Locker 447. 6 digits repeated, 1 to 7, 0 to 3 to 9 to 8. I drove to Los Angeles Union Station on October 1st because I didn't trust myself not to be a coward if I waited. I keep work gloves in the truck. I put them on because the metal locker banks near the baggage claim always felt like public confessionals. The manager at the luggage counter, an older man with a name tag that said Gabriel, didn't blink when I asked for a day rental on 447 with a code. People forget codes all the time, he said, fingers already working a keypad. You got ID? I handed him my license like a ritual, recited the 6 digits, and he led me to a row where 447 waited with a thin scuff at knee level. It wasn't a vault. It was a dull grey aluminum face that smelled faintly of peppermints and train oil. I breathed out, keyed the numbers and pulled. Inside, a gallon Ziploc sat on a folded blue hoodie. The bag held a cheap flip phone wrapped in masking tape, a USB thumb drive in a manila coin envelope, a $20 prepaid card, and a brass key stamped Rider 148 with a fob that read 3rd and Alameda, 2 billions. There was also a printed receipt from a budget storage facility on Alameda Street for a unit leased by someone named C. Holt, cash paid through April, and a yellow sticky note, "If I'm dead or missing, open the phone and call the first number." MD. One problem, I knew exactly who MD was. Marcus Dwyer worked delivery routes with Ethan for Lark Last Mile Logistics, a third-party courier who hustled packages off bigger trucks for the last stretch into small businesses. Marcus had gone missing in May. He was 23, big laugh, bigger appetite for risk, and he'd texted my son 3 nights before the pharmacy robbery something that read like a dare and a prayer: "If you don't walk, you'll wear it." We assumed he meant burnout. Apparently, he meant something else. I stood there in the mild hum of people moving with purpose and thought about how many times the world tells you not to touch the hot thing. I touched it anyway. I turned on the flip phone. The battery icon was green. It woke in a bare menu. No apps, no browser, just contacts, call, text. One number in favorites. The name attached was Dean. I knew that name too. Dean Lark owned Lark, Last Mile Logistics. He was the kind of man whose polo shirts fit like armor and whose handshake went 3 beats too long. He'd told me once, at a holiday party before Ethan was hired, "Your boy's quick. I like quick. People who like quick rarely like honest when it's slow." I didn't call Dean. I pulled the tape off slower, put the phone in my pocket, zipped the bag and closed the locker. Adrenaline makes men noisy. Resolve makes them careful. I signed the rental receipt, thanked Gabriel, and walked the long marble stretch to Alameda like I belonged to daylight. Budget storage sat 5 blocks down, tan block, razor wire, that said someone cared once and then stopped. The desk attendant wore a Dodgers cap and read his phone until I set the envelope down. Rider 148, fob 2 billions. The system recognized the key. He slid a clipboard over, took my driver's license without questions, and pointed me toward a freight elevator, with a blank stare that felt like permission. Unit 2B was halfway down the 2nd-floor corridor, one of those metal doors that fought you for the last inch. The fob beeped green. The cylinder turned. When I pulled it up, the storage unit breathed must and cool air and secrets. There were 3 bankers, boxes labeled Routes Q1, Routes Q2, RMA Returns. There was a blue nylon duffel bag with a tag, Holt. On top of the boxes sat a dash cam, the kind you stick to a windshield with a suction cup wrapped in a rag that used to be a t-shirt. I didn't open the boxes first. I unwrapped the dash cam and found a micro SD card taped to the base. The rag had writing on it in faded Sharpie, night of 3-4 throwaway car, Santa Ynez lot. The handwriting was Marcus's, a heavy hand that made even numbers look urgent. I drove the dash cam and the thumb drive home like they were nitroglycerin. Glendale looked too clean in October. The jacarandas not sure if they were done blooming or not. Inside my little rental, yes, I'd moved to a 1-bedroom walk-up after Marissa left because embarrassment is cheaper per month than the mortgage. I set the camera on my kitchen table and stared at it like it might tell me what to do next. Instead, I made coffee, pulled the ball cap off my head, and plugged the micro SD into an adapter. The laptop recognized it, coughed up a list of time-stamped files, each 30 minutes long, each labeled 2025 year 03 UR 04 DE 203,000, and so on. The 9 p.m. block had a star next to it. I opened it. The view wasn't a dash. It was low, like a bumper, and it faced a cross street near Santa Ynez and Alvarado, exactly 6 blocks from the pharmacy. I knew that corner. There's a taqueria that stays open late, and an auto body shop with a parking lot that never seems to have the same cars. At 9:11 p.m., a white Chevy Malibu nosed in and stopped crooked in the shadows. 2 men got out. One wore a hoodie and gloves. The other, who stayed back, wore a light windbreaker with the hood down, a thin gold chain visible at his neck even in the dim. When the hoodie ran toward Santa Ynez at 9:17, the windbreaker man leaned on the fender and checked his watch. At 9:21, the hoodie sprinted back, a bag tight to his chest, and slid into the passenger side. The windbreaker started the Malibu and pulled out smooth, like he'd done it before. The camera caught the plate plain as day when the Malibu misjudged the angle and backed up, 8 pry 210. I paused. I rewound. I took a photo with my phone just to have something in my hand that meant use. I typed the plate into a private search service I'd used when a tenant scratched my old truck last year. $49 later, the Chevy Malibu came back, registered to Lark, Last Mile Logistics, Inc., VIN ending in 7182, insured under a fleet policy out of a Glendale agent I knew by name. I didn't know whether to laugh or put my fist through the wall. Except the name on the fleet insurance contact wasn't Dean, it was E. Holt. Eric Holt was Lark's operations manager, the man who assigned last-minute routes and whose voice you heard when a delivery went sideways. He was also the man who'd texted my wife twice the summer before about a staging consult for her side hustle prepping homes for sale. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now I didn't want to think at all. I plugged in the thumb drive, the manila envelope from the locker. It had 3 folders: ledger, audio, and docs. Ledger was a spreadsheet, the kind you make when you're too busy to hide your sins. Date, time, route number, fixers paid, amount moved. The line for March 4 read like a diary: 9:15, EP Farm, Bag 1, $27,400 ESD. 9:40, Lockout, $1,200, 11Z, pay to EH 4,004 hours, pay to DL. It said who took it. Audio had 2 files named by the same night. I clicked the first. Marcus's voice came through in a whisper I recognized from my den, where boys used to plan things that smelled like teenagers and root beer. If you're listening, it's because I didn't get to drop this in person. The pharmacy thing isn't a one-off. They're using ghost cars, swapping plates, and Rios is covering. Yeah, Detective Rios. He gets a cut and makes sure the call-outs go to Holt's guys. Ethan doesn't want in. If he won't play, they'll put it on him. My stomach dropped. The second audio file was clearer, like a phone on a table in an empty room. 2 men. One said, Rios wants the plate back by 10. The other said, tell him to send the usual or the kid gets tagged. Then, we need a face-in-frame for the jurors if it goes wrong. That librarian kid's car pings near Alvarado. Good enough. The voices weren't ones I knew well. But the cadence on the second, Dean's drawn-out vowels, the half-laugh after threats, made my skin remember every handshake. I closed the laptop, because the room felt too small. When a man sees a way forward, the first instinct is to sprint. The second is to pick up the pieces in your pockets and leave quietly. I chose the second. I needed chain of custody. I needed dates. I needed someone whose testimony didn't sound like a father crying into a wind tunnel. I called Ridgepoint Digital Forensics out of Pasadena. The owner, a woman named Teresa Cho, had done some work for the school district when laptops went missing. I told her I needed a hash report on video and audio files and an affidavit of authenticity. She liked the words affidavit and retainer. I can do a rush, she said. $3,400. If you want me in court, day rate $1,800. I hesitated for the length of a mortgage payment and said yes. Then I called the Conviction Integrity Unit at the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Their recorded message said backlog, said resources, said send materials by certified mail to a P.O. box with a number long enough to feel like a shrug. I printed. I burned a copy of the files to a new thumb drive. I labeled a binder with dates and names. I wrote a cover letter like I was writing to a person who didn't know me, because that's what it was. Then I drove to the Glendale post office, paid $16.40 for certified with return receipt, and watched the clerk stamp the receipt like a judge's gavel. That was the day a silver Tacoma idled across from my apartment for 40 minutes. The man in it wore a hat pulled low and sunglasses at 4 in the afternoon. Maybe he just liked me. Maybe. But when I stepped out to the curb to get the mail, the Tacoma rolled forward 6 feet, and the driver turned his head the other way. I wrote down the plate. 6XAB 932. I didn't call it in. I took a photo. Then I stood in my living room and thought about where to put the thumb drive if someone kicked the door. I chose the only place a man like me would think of, inside the door of the service panel behind the breaker, taped flat under a warning label. People don't touch things that can bite. I put the dashcam card in a different place, the hollow of a shop vac filter in the closet, and sat down to make a list. List-making is how I keep chaos from calling itself fate. I put 6 items, 1 bank check on Marissa's accounts for unusual deposits spring-summer, 2 FOIA request, California Public Records Act request, on LARC last-mile fleet registrations, and any citations near Santa Ynez Alvarado March 4. 3 check Ethan's Google location history. 4 talk to Glendale library manager about LiveCam archive. 5 find Marcus's mother, see what she knows. 6 don't get followed. One problem. The last item is hard to do on a budget. I started with the Google account because there's no one to call for that. Ethan had given me his password when he got the job so I could help with timesheets if his phone died. I clicked location history, March 4th. A familiar red line traced his day. School in the morning at Glendale Community College, shift at the library starting at 3 p.m. At 9:07 p.m., his phone put him at the returns desk. At 9:34, the line moved to the staff room, then the parking lot at 10:03 p.m. The phone never went to Echo Park. Maps can lie. Cameras are meaner. I talked with the library manager, an old union guy named Doug who wears suspenders and keeps peppermints in a jar. We only keep the lobby camera for 30 days, he said. My heart thudded. Then he looked at his desktop with the same regret I get when I can't save a motor. But custodial logs. Those we archive for the quarter because the city likes audits. If your boy logged a nightly checklist on March 4th, it'll be stamped. He printed the page, a simple time grid with Ethan's initials and a scrawl that looked like his when he was 9. 9:31 restock paper. 9:43 log returns cart. 1002 lock rear door. Doug signed the bottom as custodian of records because I asked, and because men like him understand that a line at the bottom of a page can be a bridge over water in the dark. But then the silver Tacoma showed up again, 2 blocks over, in the reflection of a barbershop window I passed on purpose. I stopped calling it coincidence. I went to see Marcus's mother in Highland Park, a hairdresser named Yolanda who could hold tears in her eyes without letting them out. Her porch had 3 hanging ferns that needed water and a wind chime made out of old spoons. I told her I had something that might clear my son and asked if she knew what her boy had been doing with a dashcam on March 4. She didn't ask to see proof. She asked if I'd eaten. Then she pulled a shoebox off a shelf and set it down between us. Inside were papers, route slips, payroll stubs, a Polaroid of Marcus and Ethan wearing the same stupid trucker hats backwards. The thing that mattered was an envelope with a receipt stapled to it from a pawn shop on Sunset, dated March 3rd. Dashcam, $30, sold by M. Dwyer. He bought it the next day, she said, voice steady. Said he needed one that didn't look like a camera. She pressed my hand. He told me to tell you if anything happened to him, Dean's money smelled like bleach. I don't know what that means. I did, at least in the way a layman knows the shape of a storm. Bleach means cleaning. Cleaning means where there's blood or where there's truth. If Dean was laundering money through returns or route adjustments, someone had to make the numbers look like daylight. I filed the public records request with the DMV for fleet lists under Lark. I sent another to the LAPD for radio logs on March 4th near Alvarado from 8:45 to 9:30 p.m., requesting the steps for unit assignments and any off-the-books calls. The city's portal promised a response within 10 days. You never know if 10 is a real number or a moral one when agencies say it. On October 6th, Ridgepoint sent me the first report. Hash values printed in bold beside file sizes. The letter used words like authentic, unaltered, original creation date, and reliable metadata. Teresa also included transcriptions of the audio files and a recommendation I not play them for just anyone without counsel. I took a photo of the words reliable metadata and texted it to Ethan's attorney. Donahue responded with the emoji he reserves for grace and war, a thumbs up I've seen above expensive bourbon and over a binder full of bad facts. Donahue's office smelled like coffee and dry cleaning. He read the report and sat back slow. This is real, Jake. Even a hard-nosed judge will respect chain of custody if Teresa testifies. The plate ties Holt. The audio, if we can connect Rios to the phone number, kicks a door wide. He tapped his pen against the edge of the desk. We file a petition for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence and request immediate evidentiary hearing. We also notify the Conviction Integrity Unit, even if they're slow. But there's a problem. There's always a problem. Your wife, he said. Holt's name and Dean's name brush against her business here in your notes. If the DA thinks there's a domestic angle, they'll probe whether any of this is self-serving or revenge-tinged. We keep her out of it, unless the proof makes it necessary. I wanted to argue, to bring up the text messages where Eric asked Marissa about staging consults with payments that didn't match the work. I wanted to say the number, $12,800, that had landed in her business account in split deposits in May and June, flagged by my bank when I still had access to the joint. But throwing a match is different than setting a fire. I breathed. I said, we stay clean. We filed on October 9th. Motion for new trial, request for emergency stay, notice to the CIU. Donahue knew how to phrase urgency without sounding like a man banging on a door. He set the hearing for October 21st on Judge Ortega's calendar, the same judge who'd seen the verdict. He told me to expect pushback, to expect the DA to ask for continuance, to expect quiet resistance from anyone named in our exhibits. I nodded like a man bracing for wind. That night the Tacoma wasn't across the street, it was in my alley. I heard the idol through the window unit and turned the lights off before my brain remembered to be scared. I picked up my phone, told myself not to touch the door, and took a video through the blinds anyway. The Tacoma rolled back, slow, then quick, then was gone. I saved the file and sent it to Donahue. He responded 2 minutes later. If anyone approaches, don't confront. Call me at 911. We need this documented, not dramatized. Except I've fixed enough heavy machinery to know when something wants to break you before you break it. I bought a $69 trail camera the next morning at a sporting goods store and set it in the stairwell window behind a plant. Pointed at the alley, motion activated, time-stamped. Men like me don't have many weapons. We have timestamps. On October 12th, the DMV sent a response. Fleet registration for Lark included 3 white Chevy Malibus, one with a VIN ending in 7182. The plate matched. My hands shook, but not from fear. Some shakes are a release valve. I printed the document and slid it into the binder behind a tab named Vehicles. Donahue would like the tab. He's a man who respects tabs more than some judges. On October 13th, I got a voicemail from a blocked number, a man's voice wrapped in static. You're messing with things you don't understand. Set it down, old man. I saved it. I copied it to the drive. I called my cell carrier to see if they could trace a blocked number after the fact. They couldn't. I documented that too. On October 14th, the library custodian's statement came back notarized. On October 15th, the CIU acknowledged receipt of my package and assigned a case number that looked like a social security number got jealous. We will review, the email said. Sometimes bureaucracy sounds like mercy when you're thirsty enough. Then October 16th, the mid-roll surge I didn't see coming. I received a certified letter, return address a P.O. box in Burbank, no name. Inside was a single sheet, a bank statement in Marissa's business name, Halverson Home Staging, with 2 deposits highlighted, $6,400 on May 12th and $6,400 on June 2. The memo lines said consult, both from a company named Harbor Vista Media LLC. At the bottom, in pen, an arrow pointed to a tiny routing number with the words, Harbor Vista equal to Lark's Shell. Ask Yolanda about the party on the roof. The party on the roof was a phrase that looked like normal words until you heat them. Then they bend. I drove to Yolanda's again. She didn't open the door until she saw my face through the curtain. She made coffee this time. When I said Harbor Vista, she flinched like a hair had fallen in her eye. Marcus hated those nights, she said. After a big score, that's what they called it, party on the roof, not a real roof. The loading dock at the Aliso yard. Dean would hand out envelopes. Eric kept a list. Rios would show up late like a king. What about Harbor Vista? She tapped her spoon against the cup and stared out the window the way we both always do when we don't want to say a name out loud. Marcus said Dean used a media company to launder cash, fake social ads, ghost marketing. He said names came on checks that didn't belong to that world. Stagers, painters, anyone who'd take cash. Your wife's name came up once. He didn't want to tell you. I drove home on surface streets because freeways make a man think he's in a river he can't control. At a red light, I swallowed humiliation like a flat aspirin. This was my revenge line. I could take down the men who put my boy in a cell, or I could burn down the rest of my life to prove I wasn't stupid. I chose the former, and it felt like a vow. The night before the hearing, October 20, Donahue called. The DA's office moved quick, he said. CRU flagged the case. They aren't conceding, but they're not fighting an evidentiary hearing. We'll get 3 hours, 10 a.m., Ortega's courtroom. He paused. Jake, do not look at Marissa if she shows. Keep me as the lens. Morning of the 21st. The courthouse corridors smelled like old carpet and new anxiety. I wore my one good suit, a charcoal that fit when I wasn't eating dinner out of paper and worry. Donahue was crisp. Teresa from Ridgepoint carried a pelican case like a soldier. The DA assigned a deputy named Kimberly Wu. Sharp eyes, plain bun, file thin enough to be an opening. Judge Ortega looked at me once the way a doctor looks at a chart before he looks at the patient. She ran through the docket, then said, "Mr. Halverson, you're the petitioner's father. You may sit." She didn't say I could breathe. That was on me. Teresa testified first. She explained hash values in a way that didn't make jurors roll their eyes because there were no jurors, just a judge with a pen. She said the files hadn't been altered since their creation dates, that the dashcam video's metadata indicated recording in the window we claimed, that the audio files were original to the device. Ortega asked 2 questions that sounded like 4. Teresa answered like she'd seen bigger knives. Then I testified. I told the locker story clean. No bravado. No guesses. I described Gabriel the clerk without assuming his last name. Judges notice when you pretend to know more than you do. I explained the storage unit, the boxes, the dashcam, the fob. The DA asked why I didn't call the police the second I found the evidence. I told the truth, because when a detective's name is on a recording about covering crimes, calling his station first felt like dialing into a room where the fox picks up. Kimberly Wu clicked a pen and said, "And you're alleging Detective Rios is corrupt based on a voice you recognized from a holiday party?" "No," I said. "I'm alleging Detective Rios is compromised based on these audio files, the subsequent receipts we'll enter, and the convoy of vehicles in video that matches fleet records and route slips. The recognition is seasoning, not meat." The judge's mouth did a small thing like a smile trying to be a cough. That helped. We played the dashcam clip. When the Malibu's plate popped on screen, even the bailiff leaned a hair forward. We entered the DMV fleet list. We played the audio. Teresa authenticated the source. Kimberly asked for a sidebar. Judges don't sigh on mic. They sigh in the eyes. Ortega granted it, then reconvened. Kimberly kept her voice level but softer. She asked for a continuance to confirm the identity of the voices and to subpoena Detective Rios's duty logs that night. One problem, continuance is delay, and delay is a kind of verdict. Donahue stood. "Your Honor, we have Logan Square auto body shop camera footage pulled by subpoena that shows the same Malibu with the same plate backing into their lot at 9:27 p.m. It's 1 block from the pharmacy. We also have the library custodian's records placing Ethan in Glendale during the window. Delay causes irreparable harm. We played the auto body video. The Malibu happened like physics." Ortega looked at her notes the way a person looks at a decision they can already feel in their hand. "We will take a 15-minute recess," she said. "Silence isn't empty in a courtroom. It's a vessel." Back in session, Ortega's voice cut through the room like a cable with current. "The petition for a new trial is granted. The court vacates the conviction. The defendant is ordered released to the custody of the sheriff pending the district attorney's decision to retry. Given the strength of the newly presented evidence, the court strongly encourages the people to evaluate dismissal." I didn't exhale. I sobbed quietly, then wiped my eyes with a handkerchief my mother gave me when I didn't need them yet. But then the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and 2 men in suits I didn't recognize walked in with a federal look. No loud ties, no swagger, just purpose. Kimberly spoke with them at counsel table and then approached the bench. Ortega listened. She nodded. She turned her mic back on. "There are additional developments," she said. "The United States Attorney's Office has opened a public corruption investigation. Detective Luis Rios has been detained for questioning. The people move to dismiss all charges against Mr. Ethan Halverson in the interest of justice." She turned her head slightly in my son's direction, even though he wasn't in the room yet. "Motion granted." I didn't stand. I couldn't. My legs were the kind that remember what it feels like to hold a ladder too long. Donahue put a hand on my shoulder like a man landing a plane. Teresa squeezed my sleeve. Kimberly Wu looked at me for the first time, full, like a person rather than a role, and gave the smallest nod. They brought Ethan out an hour later into the hallway. No cuffs, no chain at his waist, just a paper bag with his property and a tiredness that made the fluorescent lights look dangerous. He put his forehead against mine and said, "You did it." I said, "We did it, because men like me often lie in one direction and tell the truth in the other." We weren't done. Friendly men in unfriendly suits introduced themselves as the Public Corruption and Civil Rights section. They asked if I'd sit for a recorded interview. If Teresa would share her underlying forensic images, if Donahue would make the binder available under a protective order. We agreed. Revenge isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's an exchange of signatures. Over the next 2 weeks, the story walked on legs I didn't give it. Harbour Vista Media turned out to be an LLC registered to a 26-year-old out of Bakersfield who'd never run a campaign in his life, but whose bank account had deposits that traced to Lark's business line. Eric Holt's email, pulled by a warrant, had a spreadsheet that matched the ledger in my envelope down to the cent. Detective Rios's duty logs got weird at the edges, with off-grid entries and a few too many ride-alongs with Holt that violated common sense and policy. The party on the roof was identified in photographs from a former employee's phone, brown envelopes, a cheap grill, and a view of a loading dock that made sense to anyone who'd ever waited to be paid in cash because no one wanted to write it down. On October 30th, the DA's office held a press conference without saying my name or my son's. They said dismissed in the interest of justice, and thanks to the DA's conviction integrity unit, and thanks to citizen persistence. They announced charges against Lark and Holt for organized theft, insurance fraud, and obstruction. They said Rios had been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy and bribery. The numbers they quoted were round, over $200,000 laundered, dozens of compromised incidents. Numbers get round in microphones. Except microphones don't tell you about the way a man puts his head down on his kitchen table at 1:12 a.m. because the silence finally means safety and not indifference. Microphones don't tell you you'll get a voicemail from Marissa 3 days later that starts, "I'm sorry," and then explains nothing you don't already know in fewer words than it took to leave. I met with a civil attorney in Pasadena about a wrongful conviction claim and a separate civil suit against Lark Logistics. He talked about state compensation figures that didn't pay for nights or names, but recognized calendars, something like $140 per day served. He talked about punitive damages and settlement leverage when a company suddenly wants to say rogue employees and isolated incidents. He talked about numbers that looked like a house and a truck and 4 years of therapy. I cared about one number, the last 4 digits of the phone number that called my son the morning of March 5th and told him not to come to work because there was a route change. It matched the number on a line in the audio that said, "Rios wants the plate back by 10. I printed it, not because paper itself matters, but because the sound of it sliding into a sleeve feels like a lock clicking. The day we picked Ethan up from state custody, the deputy at the release window handed me a plastic bag labeled with my son's name and a date that used to be a deadline and had turned into a beginning. The bag held a belt with a buckle dent I remembered from an afternoon he helped me lug water heaters up 2 flights of stairs for Mrs. Perrone on Maple. He put the belt on like a man putting on his own name. We drove back to Glendale with the windows cracked and the radio off. There are sounds a man owes himself after a fight, the click of a turn signal, the low breath of wind through an open inch of glass, the way his boy says dad like there was a version of the world where he never stopped. We passed Los Angeles Union Station on the freeway, the clock tower watching the tracks with a face that didn't blink. I didn't tell Ethan that the locker rental receipt was taped inside my binder under the tab labeled Origins. I didn't say that when I turned the key that day it felt like choosing a life over a posture. I didn't say that my revenge wasn't just for him, it was also for the part of me that had almost surrendered to the story other men wrote for us. When we pulled into the lot of my building, the trail camera blinked a green LED. It had 2 more videos of the Tacoma before the arrest, and none after. Closure doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes something just stops showing up. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived with a check stapled to a settlement agreement from Lark, Last Mile's insurance carrier. It wasn't the end number. It was the beginning of leverage. $85,000 for immediate costs and fees, without prejudice to further claims. We signed because building a ramp takes lumber and building a case takes time. The civil attorney smiled the way men smile when a foundation is level and the first wall goes up straight. I called Yolanda. We stood in her doorway again. I told her what they were saying now about Marcus, in rooms with microphones and flags. I told her that in every internal memo his name sat beside words like evidence, brave, and key. She looked at the sky like she expected it to tell her what to cook for dinner. He wanted to be useful, she said. He was loud when he was little. He learned quiet when it mattered. We sat. We didn't fix the world. We drank coffee that had already gone cold. A month after the dismissal, I got a certified letter from the state, notice of hearing on compensation. It had a date and a place and a line that said, "Provide documentation of economic losses." I opened a drawer and put the receipts in order. The retainer invoice with a zero balance and my initials, the Ridgepoint check stub for $3,400. The second mortgage statement with an ugly rate, the bill of sale for an F-150 that deserved a better goodbye. Numbers don't love you back, but if you keep them clean, they climb on your side of the ledger when it counts. Marissa texted once more, "Can we talk?" I wrote back, "When you're ready to tell the truth under oath." It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. Somewhere in Bakersfield or Burbank or a place between, Harbor Vista would have a registered agent with a name that didn't exist except on a mailbox. Somewhere a detective would be explaining a spreadsheet to a room with a taped table. Somewhere my son would be picking up a coffee and his hand wouldn't shake. I keep the napkin in my wallet, pressed flat like all the creased things men carry that could have been lives if they unfolded. The numbers are barely legible now. Grease, time, handling. When I look at them, I see a locker door and a choice. I see a boy's eyes behind glass, steady, not begging, not boneless, just aimed at a future no one else could see yet. On the first Sunday after Ethan came home, we drove to Echo Park without saying where we were going, parked 2 blocks from the pharmacy, and walked the long way. The metal grate was still down. The owner had put up a hand-lettered sign that said, "Thank you" to our neighbors. We stood on the sidewalk at the angle where the dashcam caught the plate, and I told my son the part ID kept to myself, the line about living in a world where people make decisions for you if you let them. He put his hand on my shoulder like a man steadying a ladder and said, "We didn't let them. I used to think saving things meant no one would ever know they were broken. Now I know it just means you keep showing up with the right tools until the piece sits the way it was always meant to." The day the judge vacated the conviction, the clock in Union Station still kept time. The only thing that changed was who was counting for.